"Mom," I said. And she said,
"Hi, Lucy." "Hi, Whizzle."
I had not seen my mother for years. My mother had never visited me in New York. In fact, my mother had never been on a plane before. I kept staring at her. I could not figure out why she looked so different.
"Hi, Whizzle."
That was her pet name for me. When I saw her, when I heard that name, which I had not heard in ages, it was as though all my tension had been a solid thing, and now it dissolved. That night, for the first time in that room, I slept without waking.
"Hi, Lucy." "Hi, Whizzle. Sleep. You sleep now, Whizzle. I think you'll be all right. I haven't had any dreams. If you weren't going to get through this, I would have seen it, so I think you'll be all right. Sleep now. Or if you can't sleep, just rest."
My mother stayed with me 5 nights, and she never slept but in that chair. We talked, intermittently. I don't think either of us quite knew what to do. She asked me a few questions about my girls, and I answered with my face becoming hot. "Oh, they're amazing," I said. "They're just amazing." About my husband, my mother asked nothing, even though he told me this on the telephone. He was the one who had called her and asked her to come be with me, who had paid her airfare, who had offered to pick her up at the airport.
She insisted that she would take a taxi.
My mother also said nothing about my father, and so I said nothing about him either. I kept wishing she would say,
"Your father hopes you get better."
But she did not. I imagined the terror that must have visited her when she stepped off the plane. It would have frightened her so much to try and find a taxi alone. I was so glad she was there. I told her this. She smiled quickly and then looked out of the window. When my husband called me on the beige telephone next to my bed, my mother would quietly rise from her chair and leave the room. I suppose during those times she found food in the cafeteria or called my father from a payphone down the hall, since I never saw her eat, since I assumed my father wondered over her safety. And after I had spoken to each child, kissing the phone mouthpiece a dozen times, then laying back onto the pillow and closing my eyes, my mother would slip back into the room. When I opened my eyes again, she would be there, in that chair. And I was tired. I was very tired. I asked for stories. I don't know why. I had no memory of her voice talking in my childhood as I heard it now, but I wanted to hear those stories so much.
"All right, then, all right. Kathy Nicely." Goodness, she came to a bad end. The thing about Kathy, I don't know how nice she really was. Kathy Nicely always wanted more. I often thought the reason she was friends with me, I don't know if you could call us friends, really. I just sewed for her, and she paid me. But I always thought the reason she would stay and talk, she did have me over to her place when her troubles arrived. But what I'm trying to say here is that I always thought she liked my circumstances being so much lower than her own. She couldn't envy anything about me. Kathy always wanted something she didn't have. She had those beautiful daughters, but they weren't enough. She wanted a son. She had that nice house in Hanston, but it wasn't nice enough. She wanted something closer to a city. What city? That's how she was. Well, she was jealous. Not of me, of course. But, for example, Kathy wanted to travel, and her husband wasn't like that. He wanted Kathy to be content and stay at home, and they would live off his salary. And he did well. He managed that farm of feed corn. They had a perfectly nice life. Anyone would have wanted their life, really. But she went to dances at some club. I've not been to a dance since high school. Kathy would come to me and get a dress made just to go to a dance. Sometimes she brought the girls over, such pretty little things, so well behaved. Now, I always remember the first time she brought them over, Kathy said to me, "May I present the pretty Nicely girls?" And when I started to say,